Welcome to episode 52 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's first and only open source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we are back with another episode which we hope will reach an audience far and wide. Tonight, we will be discussing the wide world of panoramic cameras. Medium format, 35mm, even 16mm panoramic cameras are on the agenda tonight. Before we get to that, though, let's welcome the rest of the Camerosity gang. First, from Yellow Springs, Ohio, is Mr. Paul Reibel. I hear your camera inventory is getting kind of low, Paul. Are you at all concerned about having a wide selection?
I have a broad selection, but I've reached the point now where I can actually see the floor of my house. So that means I need more cameras, Mike. Can you help me with that?
From the road construction capital of Australia is Mr. Theo Panagopoulos. Hey, Theo, are they making the streets wider down there?
No, unfortunately, they're not. Otherwise, they'll start cutting bits of houses out. But, they're contributing to the show by trying to make as much noise as possible outside my house right now.
And finally, from the land of lizards, space shuttles, and hot coffee is Mr. Anthony Rue. Hey, wait a minute. Don't you only shoot square format? What do you know about panoramic cameras?
Just have to put enough of those squares together and pretty soon you get a panorama.
All right. We have quite a few people, some exciting names, some repeat customers, a couple names I don't recognize in the waiting room, so let's let them in. All right. As the Brady Bunch squares in Zoom fill up the screen, we have a nice selection of people here. Lots of returning customers. Andrew Smith is back, Mark Faulkner, Ray Nason, Dean Blumberg. Dean, all the way from Johannesburg, is that right?
Correct. But today I'm in Cape Town.
Cape Town. That's still like tomorrow morning, though, right?
It is tomorrow morning, yes.
Awesome. See, told you far and wide. We have Richard Diver. How you doing, Richard? Welcome back.
I'm doing really well.
Skip Williams, welcome back, Skip. And Marwan, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning. Well,
how you doing?
It's good morning here.
So where are you calling from?
Germany, next to
Germany.
Frankfurt.
Awesome. Welcome to the show. But everybody else, thanks for coming back. I thought a good spot to kind of get started maybe is what exactly is panoramic? Like at what point is an image panoramic? Is it anything wider than 4x3 or 24 by 36? Is 6x9 panoramic, or how far do you have to go before something is officially considered panoramic?
Actually, can we throw that one to Dean? Because you're in filmmaking, aren't you, Dean? So
yeah,
there's a concept of the panoramic ratio in filmmaking, isn't there?
There's a little bit of it. It's a big debate. Obviously, formats have changed over the decades, but I think even though I think panoramic imagery has been around for since the beginning of photography, by modern standards, it begins with sort of the 50s in CinemaScope, where you've got filmmaking stretches beyond the 4x3 Academy ratio, which is the typical ratio on a 35mm piece of celluloid, which shrunk when they invented sound. So they put that in and you get the 4x3 Academy ratio. So then TV takes on that 4x3 ratio and cinema competes with the CinemaScope, and you get this widescreen panorama. So I guess it is anything by today's standards, and it's a big debate and people can disagree. By today's standards, it's anything that breaks probably the frame of 4x3, but even further than that, I think it's even starting to break into anything 16x9, 1x185, all those sort of formats begin to create widescreen. Because I think that the debate you probably want to have is it widescreen, a panorama? Because the panorama is almost pointing towards landscape photography or banquet photography versus what is a widescreen image. It's like the half frame debate.
That's specifically why I wanted to relate it back to film, because that is that tension between watching a widescreen movie and the term panoramic gets used a lot as well. So where does that fit in?
I think it's more photography. I must be honest. You don't really hear panoramic in the filmmaking world.
Well, there is. You're right, and I agree with what you're saying. The one the most glaring example of it to me was Walt Disney at Disney World back in the 70s and 80s had a 360-degree theater, and they were done. The filming was done, I think, on 70mm projectors, 70mm cameras, and then projected on a 360-degree screen. and that's like the ultimate panorama. The origins of it go back so far, and one of the biggest users of panorama type photography in olden times was what they call banquet cameras, which were actually just used to photograph a banquet or a meeting or a group of people or something like that inside. And most of them were, I believe, 7 by 17, 7 inches by 17 inches. And you still see a lot of those being shot today.
Are banquet cameras the same as a circuit camera, or is that?
No, the banquet camera was just actually one sheet of film that was exposed at one time. And a circuit camera was a rotating camera itself that was on a clockwork type arrangement that it sat on. And it wasn't a moving lens, it was a moving camera.
Was the circuit camera the one where people would get on one side and run around?
Yes.
And get themselves twice?
When I was in college, we had a guy locally who came to do the class picture every year. And I still have a picture somewhere, a circuit camera photograph of me on a motorcycle on each ends of the picture, because I rode around behind him after it had left me.
So if we're relating panoramic still photography back to motion picture, the motion picture industry, right? Like there's a whole bunch of aspect ratios. You got 1.85 to 1. You have 2.35 to 1. Ben-Hur was in 2.6 or something to 1 or something crazy like that. When that gets translated to still photography, what are we talking? Like, where do we start?
I mean, you mentioned 6x9 earlier. I personally wouldn't call that a panoramic shot. That to me it's wide, but it's not panoramic.
Yeah, Theo, I think the start is a 2-to-1 ratio, 6x12 and greater.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's probably what most people would agree, that it's a 2-to-1 ratio, 24x48 for a 35 millimeter frame, or what's the XPan, 24x56?
Yes.
No, 65.
24x65.
Yeah.
So that's truly panorama.
And
in motion picture history, an exhibition, it was 1:185 was considered widescreen. Where they actually had to bring the curtains back, and they had to have screens that were wider than they had prepared for previously. But there's even an older history than that. You can look back to the silent era, and you had a filmmaker like Abel Gance in France who had done Napoleon, where for the climactic battle, he filmed it on 3 different cameras, and the theaters had to set up 3 screens and 3 projectors. So it was actually 3 times the standard, the old square frame to get the whole film in, which is actually quite thrilling to see if you've ever had a chance to see it live.
But nobody has talked so far about angle of view, because we're always talking about the format. We're talking about what's the ratio. If you just compare, and I think that's because we studied a lot the white lux idea, and when we compare it to cameras like the Hasselblad XPan, if you just take the standard Hasselblad XPan with, I think it has a 45 millimeter lens on it, that's the most people use, or the 40 millimeter.
There's the 90, 40, and 30.
And you have a 30 millimeter one. And if you just look at the angle you get, the angle of view, it's kind of like in the 30 millimeter, it's around 90 degrees, a little bit more than 90, which is, if you compare it to a Leica M with an extreme wide angle lens, let's say a 15 or 16 millimeter, it comes very close to that. But if we take, for example, the Wilux, or we take a Noblex, we come into an angle of 126 degrees, just angle of view, and in diagonal 140 degrees. So that is totally different. You have a total different geometry, especially if you think about your personal human. I personally define panoramic if that exceeds or broadens my mind, because it goes beyond what my normal view is. And I think just the ratio, the aspect ratio, is, I think, not really enough to define panoramic.
One of the examples is the Fuji G617, which is a 6 by 17 format, but it uses a 105 millimeter lens. So it isn't truly a wide angle lens. It's a panorama format. When they went to the GX617 with interchangeable lenses, then they that you could put a wider angle lens on it. I think possibly as wide as 90 millimeters.
It was 90, yes.
But it becomes an issue trying to get it to find a lens that will actually cover the 6x17 format and be at that wide an angle.
So 5x7 format?
6x7, yes. It would have to cover 5x7 inch, yes.
So I liked what Marwan said is, I was thinking pure aspect ratios, but in terms of angle of view, if it's wider than what like your eyes can see, is you're making an image that's different from what your brain perceives, and I think whether people realize it or not, and I'm just trying to like reconcile this for myself, but I think whether people realize it or not, the appeal of panoramic images is to see an image wider than you could possibly see yourself. And when you look at it subconsciously, it's like, wow, that looks so cool because I cannot see the world this way. So, honestly, the problem with angle of view is it's harder to explain though, too, I think, but it's probably more accurate because honest to God, I'm not just saying it, but before you said that, I never really realized that, when you get a truly wide angle of view, you're actually seeing things beyond what you experience through your own eyes. And I really like that.
That's a great example, actually, because when you look at the Hasselblad XPans, for instance, the most popular lens there is the 43 millimeter, which really expands it. And the same with my favorite camera, which is, Mike?
Me a 7.
Me a 7.
Now, we've already established ground rules that 6x7 is not considered a panoramic format.
It's not. But when you put the panoramic adapter
he's got the panoramic kit in there.
I got the panoramic kit.
You're gonna lose sleep on this one.
It gives you the XPan format. So, and again, it's the 43 millimeter lens that you put on, which really, really sings when you do that panoramic.
But if you just compare the Noblex has the same frame size like the Hasselblad XPan, but the Noblex has a panning lens, and the effect you get out of that is like day and night difference.
That's why I was saying that there's a conflation between wide frame and panorama that a lot of people today, because they have cameras that give you a aspect ratio that is mimics the wide frame. So my everyday carry is anything that's got that panorama crop in the little point and shoot. I've got a ton of those little guys. I love the format. I shoot predominantly in an extended frame, whatever frame that is, from 185 all the way to whatever you want to call 235. And I love that format. So I carry the cropped image, but that's not a panoramic, even though they've got a panoramic. That's what's been essentially co-opted. The idea that panorama is anything cropped or essentially extended or elongated. But that's not true, because angle of view really is the true determining factor.
Dan, back in the mid to late 80s, I was doing an academic degree in film theory and fell in love with Panavision, and immediately took my Nikon FM2 and put the widest lens I could and just built a printing rig where I could crop to Panavision ratio. So it was sort of like I didn't have in-camera cropping, but I never made a print that wasn't in that aspect ratio. So I'd print on 11x17 paper, had had like a printing rig set up with the frame cut out, and I would find my photo within it. And for years, that's how I made my panoramas. Was only through the end product. It certainly wasn't in camera because I couldn't afford a Noblex at the time, being a poor grad student in film. Yeah. And but for me, it was just like the falling in love with the cinematographers that were working with wide angle. Like just watch the first 10 minutes of Once Upon a Time in the West.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's absolutely a masterclass in how to compose for panorama. And how to use that frame and close and distance and left and right.
All the non-rotating cameras are essentially just crops. Just depend. They really are. I mean, it's not the same.
In order to, I mean, you have to understand a little bit the human brain, how it processes images. And if we come to our standard angle, it's like when we look fixed to the front, in order to see what, for example, a Widelux does or a Noblex, we have to turn left and right with our eyes. And the moment you're doing that, you're creating also a circle. If you just fix a point and you do that, you just have a circle created. And that is exactly what these cameras are doing with the rotating lens. And also the center of the lens is always the best. We have that slit that scans at the end of the day over a time period, the image. And that's something that you cannot get with an XPan. If you take a 30 millimeter lens or Hasselblad XPan, then you get these Zeppelin heads. Everybody who's standing at the edge, you just get the distortion out of that wide angle lens that you're using. And and I think that is, one of the beauties of the swing lens type mechanism that you get.
So I actually wanted to ask that question, Marwan, but I'm glad you brought it up. We have a lot of people already here that are experienced with a lot of these panoramic or swing lens cameras, but putting yourself in the shoes of someone who's maybe never shot one of these before, maybe they've only seen on Facebook or Instagram a panoramic image, but they've never shot that before. Can you maybe just at a very high level explain the difference between like how a swing lens camera works versus how like the XPan works?
Well, what you have is, the XPan is in fact nothing else than a standard camera that has a typical shutter. The film is in a plane. It's just kind of like the film is just flat. And what you do is you just project the wide angle lens image on that film plane with all the disadvantages of a wide angle lens. Constructing wide angle lenses is not so easy because you have also vignetting. They have the tendency of vignetting. They have the tendency of distortions at the edges, and the quality of the lens also goes away, especially at the edges. The center is normally the best part of the lens. So when you're having a swing lens type, you have a barrel, you have a curved film plane, and that slit in the center of that barrel is in fact your shutter. You don't have a shutter in a swing lens camera. It's just a single slit that just goes like a scanning line over the film, and you have always the center of the lens and a distortion-free image to the edges. So the only problem of that is that you have to level your camera really precisely to the horizon. If you just level it a little bit up and down, then you just suddenly get also curved lines in your field that you photograph. But in fact, that is something that makes these cameras very special.
So, in order to combat the vignetting and the sharpness drop off that a wide angle lens has, you have to make the lens more complicated. So we had mentioned earlier the XPan, the 30 millimeter lens. I just looked it up. That's a 10 element lens. And Paul, how much does a Hasselblad XPan 30 millimeter lens? What's the going rate for one of those right now?
Used one right now around a little over $3,000.
Just for the lens. Whereas on a swing lens, you can get away with a much. Go ahead.
You also need the center spot filter.
Center filter. Yeah.
So you have a complicated filter to help darken the center, which kind of balances out the already darkened edges. But with I know the Soviet, the Horizont, gets away with a 3-element, a triplet. The Noblex has a 4-element Noblar. What do the Wideluxes have?
It also has, I think, a 4-element. The lens, the funny thing about that is that you don't need much engineering for the lens. You can use very simple lens constructions, and you get really great results.
Hell, the original Kodak Panorama, I think, was a meniscus. Those are medium format panoramics. So where I'm kind of going with this is the cost to build a XPan and buy one is prohibitively high, whereas you can get away with a less expensive, simpler lens that's going to actually produce probably just as good, if not better, results without any gimmicks of like a center spot filter and a swing lens.
Yeah, it is a meniscus.
Yeah, and over there, he's holding up. Patrick Rapps is holding up a Panorama. Is that a number 1 or
number 4?
Number 4. Okay, so
it is a meniscus lens. Yeah. I've had it apart. Yeah. The big problem with these older ones is there's no, the film speeds were different. So there's no aperture. So I've actually taken to putting a fender washer with a rubber washer to hold it in place to reduce the size of the aperture. Works pretty well. It's just, there's no focus. It's a fixed focus. They're interesting.
It's like a tube. It's a tube with a lens on the end of it with a center pivot and a spring.
Yep.
Right. I mean, am I oversimplifying it?
Oh, that's That is it, actually.
I've actually reviewed the number 4, or maybe it was the number 1. I can't even remember, but I have pictures of what they look like on the inside too. Really fun cameras. They're just hard to find in working condition today because they're so old.
Yeah, my problem was a new leather, because the leather was leaking, and a guy in Australia made for me a new chamois to replace it.
And so what do you use? You have to cut sheet film for it?
Oh, no, 120. I've modified it to take, it was 122 film, but it's 120. And that's the image printed.
That's a 120?
Yeah.
Now, how big is 122?
It's the autographic size. It's the same as goes in a 3A, a Kodak 3A or a Graflex 3A.
Yeah, was it about 50% bigger than 120 or so?
Yeah, that's probably good. Yeah.
It's not that much.
This here is a 3A, which I just happen to have sitting right next to me. The reason why I've actually got the 3A sitting next to me, because it was one of the topics I wanted to tackle, which is using 120 in 122 cameras will give you, in the 3A, it's 3.25 by 5.5 inch, which is 6 by 14 roughly, if you put in 120. So that's one of the ways I was going to try and experiment and get panoramics. But obviously with that that panorama that you had there, Patrick, that's a different level altogether.
Theo, do you have to make a mask for that then, so it keeps the film from bowing around?
Possibly. I haven't tried it yet, but possibly you may have to, unless the tension is good enough. But being an old Kodak, I suspect the tension might not be that great, so you may need to make a mask.
I know Eric Mathy out in California was modifying those.
Just to show you the difference in size, the camera I've got next to it is a Zeiss 616, Zeiss Super Conta 616, which I'm also going to try that on. And you know, look at the difference in size, just those two.
So Theo's holding up, for anybody who's seen what an old early 20th century folding Kodak is. You know, if you think 120 is this kind of film you can get today, 116 is larger, and then the 122 is even bigger than that. So it's a huge honking folding camera. And to answer your question, whether you need a mask, you definitely should have a mask. That's the only way to hold the film plane flat. Otherwise, it'll bow. Yeah, Patrick showing the difference in spool size between 120 and 122.
122, and yeah.
So it's about 50% bigger, maybe 40.
Yeah, it's about. I think it was a good guess. Yeah.
But I mean, if you don't use a mask, you'll obviously, the edges will be more blurred. But you might actually like that though. So it just depends on the look you're going for.
I'll jump in and say I've been shooting a Zeiss Coquerette with the 116. And I've been shooting it without a mask and getting really satisfactory results. I'm not getting any bowing at all. And it could just be that the Zeiss is really good at tensioning the film, or just the way that the film guides are set up. But I've never noticed any distortion with the Coquerette.
Theo, what you're trying to do, I've done with my 3A Graflex. I've got a working 3A with the focal plane works on it, and I use a mask. I made a mask on both sides of the frame with, believe it or not, gaffer's tape. I just did gaffer's tape front and back, and then real simple to do, and you could take it off again.
Yeah, I mean, reality is this one I've got here, the Kodak 3A. It's not going to be, you know, Hasselblad or Mamiya 7 type quality. So, yeah, a bit of gaffer tape or something like that to mask it should be more than enough to give it the right quality level.
I know that this company Camera in Italy makes a lot of those adapters where you can put the 120 in those big.
Yes, yeah.
They do the Facmatic, that thing allows you to put 35 millimeter into Instamatic cameras.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since we've kind of already touched upon it a little bit, I mean, we have Marwan here from Silver Grain Classics, and I promise we were going to do a panoramic episode anyway. For those of you who've listened to the podcast since the very beginning, the first 5 episodes, we just kept talking about panoramic cameras all the time. And I think someone reminded me that I made a joke that it was the first open source panoramic podcast, because it just, they kept coming up, because I know Johnny Sisson was just a huge fan of panoramic cameras. I am, Theo, you know, who isn't, right? But we have Marwan here from Silver Grain Classics, and you can't be in this hobby and have not already seen the announcement that you guys are looking to bring back the wide lux.
Yes,
arguably,
I have some prototype parts here if you want to see them later.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think I need to necessarily introduce the wide lux too much. I mean, it's clearly the most longest produced panoramic camera ever, from like 55 to 2000 or something like that.
Yeah, since the end of the 50s. But I think the Russians were earlier with it. So the Horizon, there was one model of the Horizon that was earlier than the Hilux.
They got started, but the Horizon, but it wasn't produced continuously that whole time. No. They ended production of those, I think, in the mid 60s or so. But I believe the wide lux was in continuous production.
Yes. Yeah, but they only made 20,000 units.
Yeah,
it's really and that's it. You just according to the serial numbers, Hilux, the company Panon, started as a manufacturer for medium format panoramic cameras, kind of like really big, and then in the mid 50s they started to shift over to 35, and later in the 90s they brought back the medium format models again, but they made not really a lot, and in 2000 then the company burned down. So that was the end of the production, but over the time they only did 20,000 units.
And, so you guys are looking to sort of bring back the wide lux. I mean, it's probably a tall task convincing people to check out this camera. I mean, don't you think the job would be a little bit easier if you had like a celebrity or somebody who was kind of a fan of that camera?
Oh, yeah, that would maybe help. Yes.
Would it help?
It would help.
No, I mean, we all know who I'm talking about. Jeff Bridges is a huge fan of the wide lux. And what I think is important to distinct is this isn't just Kim Kardashian woke up one day and was seen shooting a Contax or something. Jeff's been a huge advocate of that camera for 30, 40 years, right?
It's not only Jeff, it's also his wife, Susan. I have to say that Susan Bridges and Jeff Bridges, they just told us the story that their wedding in the mid 70s, their photographer who was there was having a wide lux camera, and he did also photos on other films formats, but the only photos of their wedding party are the ones from the wide lux that survived. So and it has a very personal thing to them, and this camera, I think the first wide lux he got from his wife. So it has a personal touch to the family of the Bridges, and it was for them really a personal thing to bring it back.
So chicken or the egg? Was it you who contacted him about it? Or
no, it was totally different. We suddenly got honestly, since I'm in that magazine business, I just really thought, I wish one day to have an interview with Jeff Bridges. And then one morning, my colleague contacted me and he said, guess what? We got an email from an assistant from Jeff Bridges. They wanted to ask if we were interested in one of their portfolios. And I said, absolutely. So that's how it started. And then we got into an interview. And during that interview, Jeff suddenly said, well, where are you in Germany? We said, we're in Frankfurt, close to Wetzlar, where Leica is located. And then they said, why can't you contact them? Maybe they want to bring back a wide lux. So we first thought it's kind of like one of these typical chit chats you do, wouldn't it be nice if the Rolling Stones would do again a world tour or something like that? It would be nice. And then days later, they asked us again and again and again. And then we just said, okay, we're going to investigate if it's possible. And that's how it started. That's
awesome. Yeah, I've seen some of his work, and he's clearly talented, because I tell you what, one thing, and this is a question I do not have the answer to. I like shooting panoramic cameras. I've shot the XPan. I've shot the Kodak Panorama, the Horizont, that weird Soviet F21 camera. I've shot some of the crop sensor, that Minolta Vista, whatever it's called, that's like only crop. It can't do anything else. And the one thing that I am not good at is framing panoramic to actually take advantage of it. I mean, because like anybody could point a panoramic camera at a statue and capture the statue in the middle and a whole bunch of other visual information to the side. But the key is, how do you take that whole angle of view, all the film real estate that you're about to capture, and make an interesting story that actually, because if you do it right, you can tell a story in a single image. And that is the difference between someone who's just pointing a camera at something and pressing a shutter release, and somebody who really is good at panoramic. So not necessarily for Marwan, anybody else who thinks that they have figured it out, help me, help the listeners. I don't know, like, how do you start to see a panoramic image before you take it so that you end up with something visually interesting?
It's difficult. I mean, I've shot wide lux, I've owned Noblex, I've owned Fuji G617s, Linhof 6x17, 6x12s, and except for I bought them and I was doing most of my jobs as commercial work. So non-artistic, as in kind of like comparing photography to white seamless. Put it on a white seamless and shoot it. So it's definitely a learned skill. And for people that are good at this, like Jeff is amazing. His photography and his wife's photography is absolutely amazing. Barring that, yes, there's no fingers in the frame either. But it's a learned skill. It's a lot
easier to take the flat pictures in a lot of ways, because you can pick them up and look at them. You may not get the thing close to your eye, but you can see them. With the swing lens, you have to, the wide lux has got the little arrows on top of it, so you can kind of, look back and forth and see it, but still hard.
Well, in fact, the viewfinder of the wide lux is terrible. It's kind of like we just made that joke among Jeff and us. We call it guess finder. So it's more like that. For example, the Noblex has a much better viewfinder. The Horizon has a much better viewfinder. But what they all lack is a little bit that classic style, that this metal thing, the mechanism in there. So yeah. But one of the things what I started now to do is I'm just using the panoramic cameras more as my always with me camera. When I go to a city that I've never been before, it helps me to catch, even maybe unconsciously, more information than I really think about. And I just noticed it's wonderful because, first of all, you don't have shaky images anymore, because that slit, even if it's 1/15 of a second, you'll be surprised. You put a Cinestill 800 film in it, or a Portra 800, and you just go at night. I was recently in Brussels, was photographing at night with 1/15 of a second. It works perfectly. There's on the magazine one of photos we did at night, and it's really, really an easy to use camera. And for example, Jeff and Susan are very good examples. Jeff is a person who photographs more like Henri Cartier-Bresson. He just takes the camera out of the hip and makes an immediate photo. Susan, for example, she's more the person who sits there for like a large format photographer and creates the image perfectly. All the lines should be perfect. So it's kind of like the type, you have to decide what kind of type of photographer you are.
The real test was always vertical panoramas, because when I worked for Fuji, I had a guy named Jack Krawczyk out of Cleveland, and he traveled around and did cityscapes. And his specialty, because he followed the weather patterns, but his specialty became panoramas. The real problem then was, how do you display them? Because you needed someplace he was making huge prints, and so they got into stairwells and things like that. But you needed so much space for a big print.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick before we go on, Bob, you just joined us a little bit late. Can you introduce yourself real quick?
Oh yeah, Bob Grzesiak. I was a Fuji Pro Products rep for 20 years, and before that, I ran camera stores. So, been around panorama and shot a lot of them. I took it all over the place. So,
Bob was my Fuji rep.
Who said that?
It's Paul.
Oh yeah, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, Bob was very good to us. He got us a lot of product at times when it was when they were hard to get. We had a pictrostat that ran all the time.
What a great machine that was! Yeah. But yeah, a whole different era for sure.
Yeah, you touched upon vertical panoramas, and I've actually tried one before, and I can't handle a landscape panorama, so vertical is a whole completely different ball game.
Landscape isn't that hard though. I mean, the Fuji was easier because there you go. The Fuji was easier, especially when we went to the GX, because you could just hold the different viewfinders for the different lenses, and that made the visualization, I think, a little easier. Because handling the camera wasn't easy.
If you really want to drive the Instagram crowd crazy, put a vertical panorama into an Instagram feed.
Mike, if I could get back to one of your questions, though, you'd asked about like learning composition and learning how to shoot with panorama. And, this is the old film history teacher and me coming back saying, go back and look at the classic widescreen CinemaScope films from the 1950s through the 1970s and look at how some of these master cinematographers worked with composition. And I think that, as film photographers, we're used to looking at the Magnum photographers, looking at Cartier-Bresson, but I think that panorama is something different, and that it, in a way, the way that in pop culture we think about panorama does come out of widescreen cinema, and that there's a lot to be learned. And of course, I think that Jeff's shooting these on the sets of movies, in sets that are lit to be movies, working with cinematographers. And, I think that that's why his photographs are as compelling as they are, because it's drawing from that history of film, of cinema. And, I just can't recommend enough going back and especially just like even later films like Paris, Texas, and just look at people that are working with widescreen, even if they're not CinemaScope, but working with like wide Panavision. There's a lot to be learned about how to put that frame together in a way that's more compelling than just like there's a statue with a whole bunch of stuff on the left and the right.
I would agree with Anthony too about looking at films, motion pictures. And I think I tend to look at panorama like you're thinking flat, not in depth of field. Like how can you work with depth of field more in your panoramic images? Again, making them more interesting.
Well, can you really do a lot of narrow depth of field in a panoramic camera? I mean, how would you do that?
You can put the I know that my Noblex, I have a diopter for it, and you can put a +1 or +2 or +3 diopter.
Okay.
You lose the infinity focus, but you gain a depth of field. They have a magnetic. You turn this around, and there's a magnetic filter that sticks in there.
Okay.
They're incredibly difficult to find now, though.
Well, we are also working on filters for the wide looks, so that will be one of the points when we just so that we have also filters that would work and could go for close images. But what some people did was they were taking contact lenses and putting contact lenses in front of the lens, just
like for your eye, like.
The typical eye contact lenses, I mean, after 24 hours, you can't use them anymore. So you just use one and you just put it on it's a little bit of trial and error, but it works. Yeah. So,
you have to keep it wet for sure.
Yeah, you have to. Yes.
Marwan, what does it do to the image? I would love to try that. What does it do? Putting the contact lens on?
It's a meniscus lens.
Yes. So it creates a meniscus over the lens.
It's like a close-up lens.
Yeah, okay. You have to. Yeah, you just come closer to it. You have to experiment a little bit. It's not a real science that you do, but it helps to get closer to your image. Beside closing the f-stop, but we are definitely working on filters, and we will also try to see what we can do with lenses that make it possible to go closer to your object.
There's a guy in Australia that's making.
Yes, we talked with him.
Yeah,
yes. He makes the filters. He makes the classic color filters, doesn't he?
Well, yeah, he 3D prints the little arms, and then he fits filters. When I had my Noblex overhauled, and there's not many people doing these. The guy in Canada is pretty much the only guy. Siggy Road is like the only guy, and he replaces the black rubber thing that gets sticky under here, the roller. And I had him. I sent him an orange, an infrared, and he made me filter holders with an infrared and an orange. And I bought a diopter, and he said, "These are the last holders I have." You can't find them. You can find the 120 holders on eBay every so often, but the 35 holders, nobody sells them. Nobody.
What's really cool and unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the Noblex has such a critical point of failure. There is like a drum with what Skip was talking about out of a wax material that was meant to kind of make it grippy, but it lasts maybe 10 years tops, and it starts to degrade and it falls off. And once that happens, the drum can't spin at the correct speed anymore. But the cool thing about the Noblex that makes it different from like the Wide Lux, the Horizon, pretty much any other swing lens camera, is in other swing lens camera, the lens swings back and forth. Like in the Noblex, it just spins in a continuous circle. There's an electronic motor, and the Noblex, correct me if I'm wrong, is the only swing lens camera that can do double exposures.
Oh, no, they're not doubles. You can hold it down as long as
you want.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll just spin and spin and spin.
And if you have the right light meter, the panel looks on it, then even you can control the rotation. But we talked. The thing is, it was not necessarily that we wanted to bring back the Widelux, because Jeff wanted to have that swing lens camera back, and so we were investigating if there's a possibility to bring whatever swing lens. Oh, cool!
You have a Panelux. Wow.
I have no idea how to use it. I have the manual for it. It's confusing as hell, and I just took it off.
Well, it's German.
Yeah. So what this is, it mounts to the top of the camera.
Yes.
And it's essentially auto exposure for a swing lens camera. But even more than that, it can actually vary the speed of the swing. Yes. So if one part of your image is more exposed than the other, it can actually change the speed throughout the motion, which just blows my mind. That it's possible. But what's really cool about the Noblexes is with that multiple exposure where you can just keep having the thing spin around.
Yes.
Marco Kroger, I can't pronounce it right, has a really great German language website where he reviews a lot of East German cameras, but he's got an excellent review of the Noblex I could include in the notes. But he went into like a subway station with real shitty light, and he mounted the Noblex to like a tripod or some fixed surface. And there were people in there. So he would have it spin around, and then someone would walk by. He would just wait, and then they'd walk away, and then he'd spin the lens around a little bit more, and then more people were walking. So he was shooting an image, and it wasn't crowded, but it was an active subway, and he only swung the lens around when there was nobody there. And after doing like 16 or so exposures on top of himself, when he ended up developing the image, he got an entire subway completely empty. Mm-hmm. He was able to just not make it take pictures while there was someone in his way. And it took him forever. I can't imagine calculating exposure on something like that. But the images he got from it, like there's just no way to do that on any other camera.
Well, remember the first daguerreotype was of Paris from the window, and the only people in it were the guy getting his shoe shined, and the shoe shine kid was a blur. So it's the same kind of deal. That's pretty nice circle right there.
But the Noblex is, you really can't do that, at least not easily on any other swing lens camera. But the Noblex is, even though they're not that old, we're talking about a camera from the 90s. Very few of them work, and there's almost nobody who could fix them anymore.
The thing is, we talked with the design team because we were thinking about bringing the Noblex back also, because the design team's still there. The company Noblex still exists. It had the biggest chance to get technical drawings so that we could do a reverse engineering. So we talked with the design team of the company Noblex and those who invented the Noblex camera, and they told us that these cameras were they never left the prototype status. So most of them were already not really reliable when they were new.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the thing, because you have to see they were made in Dresden after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the camera industry in East Germany was really in trouble. So the government was supporting them, and they tried really to get their business running. So they just said, what can we do? And they just got the Noblex, made the Noblex. And the Noblex is a clever design, but even with the technology from then, you could have made it better. And especially that rubber wheel is kind of like, why are you doing that? You could have taken a micromotor or something like that. So they were thinking too much in East German, Soviet, communist models, what they were just putting what they had, and they made that camera. It was very successful, but it was not very durable, and it was always kind of a camera with problems.
But did anybody expect these cameras, any cameras, to last this long?
No.
Nobody. I mean, the Pentax 6x7, our joke in the business was always you had to have at least 3, so you had one that wasn't in the shop. Yeah. And that was when they were new. So,
but the failure rate was very high with the Noblexes, even with new ones.
What is the difference between the angle of view between Widelux and Noblex? Widelux is 170 odd, or was it?
I think they're all about 140.
Yeah, approximately. They have a very similar.
Approximately 140, very similar.
I can tell you that after multiple rows of film, I still could not stop getting my fingers in the image on the Noblex. So there's a rubber kind of indentation that you have to keep. The problem is, though, and I'm holding this, but the camera is actually pretty big. I mean, it's not a lightweight camera, and you're holding a valuable camera that you want to hold steady. And the only way to do it is with your fingertips. So you're like out in the wild shooting an expensive, rare, barely working camera, and your instinct is to just grip it, because you don't want to drop it, but you can't. You have to hold it with the very tips of your fingers, or just kind of have a, what they really need is like what the Zeiss Hologon has. You need like a trigger, a handle for below it or something would actually be the best way to do it.
Two things. One, the strap on this is horrible.
Mine doesn't have the strap.
Well, I just made a double. I just threw a strap through there, but it doesn't have a strap on the left side. It's only got one strap, which is, whoever thought that up was an idiot.
Yeah, it's got a wrist strap, like it's a tiny little point and shoot. But I mean,
Exactly.
it's got the weight of a full size SLR, even though it looks plastic. I mean, it's all plastic from the outside, but this camera has some heft to it. And this is the 35 millimeter version. They made a medium format too, which I've never even seen one of those.
Medium format I've shot extensively. It's not that much heavier, believe it or not. It's not that much larger. I was carrying one for a while.
Which one, Ray? The 120, the 12, the 12, or the other one?
The 150.
The one, there's a 175 too.
I had the 150, and what was unusual about mine is when you took a photo, the drum would spin once to get up to speed. Basically, the drum was firing in two rotations, unlike the wide luck, which is one rotation, or the Horizont. But the Noblex 150 was a dual rotation of the drum itself.
Yeah, they had to do that. Yes, that's right. But you have a big shutter delay. That's the next thing with the Noblex. It's kind of like not like the wide looks or the Horizon so spontaneously.
For users, they don't realize that's a giant difference in the way these cameras operate. The Noblex, as Marwan indicated, it takes a whole half of a rotation for the exposure to start as the drum gets up to speed, and then it breaks after it passes. The wide lux and the Horizon, they've tension in it. As soon as you press that shutter release, there's the wide lux, and you turn them, and as soon as you hit that button, it's going right then. So you can do candids with them. Whereas with the Noblex, it's not easy. You really got to time it just right.
But especially, and that's one of the things what I do love about that swing lens type camera. You have a hybrid between a motion picture camera and a still photography camera, and there you are and I think that's also one of the things Jeff does. He's creating stories, and you have a still image, but you can see the motion in it. And that's what I personally love about it. And that what I also noticed when you walk through a street and you see all that action, that makes these cameras so sexy for me.
Well, and it doesn't hurt that he's a very accomplished Hollywood actor who knows what it takes to make cinematography, and he can apply that to composing, a still image.
And I'll also tell you the rise and fall is surprisingly useful.
Yeah, what he's talking about. There's a wheel that you can move it, and it'll actually lift, like give you a slight rise and fall of, I think, like 10 degrees.
Great
maybe
for architecture. Yeah.
It gives you about 4 millimeters, and you can see it in the finder. There's a little cutout in the top of the finder, a little notch. And that's the amount that you move it down or up, so if you're shooting, you can do it like this, or you can turn the camera upside down and you can turn the camera down, and you get the same thing because the shift only works one way.
So Marwan, as you move forward with this project, are you looking at it being a 3D printed product, or are you going to be casting?
Well, I just have here some parts if you want to see them.
I want to hear more about this project.
Well, we have it here in metal. So this is, for example, the front part. We have here just kind of like the major part. These are the most complicated things to make. We were just thinking at the beginning to do the prototype in 3D printing plastic. But first of all, Jeff hates plastic totally. And we decided even to go into a metal part prototyping. And the good thing is nowadays that if you just take two different wide luxes, we just bought some cameras and disassembled them and decided to do a reverse engineering. And we just found out that these cameras were definitely handmade. You don't find two f8s that are exactly the same. They have always short differences or small differences that make them, you cannot really interchange parts. Whenever you do that, you have to work on them to make them running. So with modern technology like 3D scanning and 3D printing, metal 3D printing, we can definitely get now a much better quality, and we're going to do that fully in Germany. So the moment we got the prototype parts from an aerospace company here in Germany that works for Airbus Industries, and they have exactly possibilities to make high precision parts in small numbers, because I mean, it's definitely not a mass produced product. So even costs are important, but with modern technology, it's unbelievable what you can do nowadays.
Is it magnesium alloy or aluminum?
I think that's an aluminum material. I can't really tell you what is the prototype metal out of it, because we just had to first getting our first cameras running so that we can really test how it works. And but we are in the middle of the prototyping phase at the moment.
I mean, the thing that I would ask, besides the price, of course, you probably can't say that, but
No.
Aperture, anything about aperture or more shutter speeds?
We were thinking about all of these things. Well, we will not have a focus, and we will also be very close to the original f8.
Okay.
It's kind of like, there are also, for example, the advance lever, for example. Jeff was first thinking about, can we make one that is more modern and not this turning knob? And then we talked with some specialists from Leica, and they said, to make one, you have to be very careful, because otherwise it kills the film. The design is not so simple. And there is a reason why the Widelux people did that over 40 years in the same way. And we didn't want to go in anything that bears risks, so that we can disappoint the customer. So what we're going to do is, what he did was, we were looking at all the problematic parts of the original Widelux. We're trying to get these problems out with modern materials, with higher precision, but we don't want to change too much of it. And it's also Jeff's philosophy. He wants that camera because that's the camera he loves. It's a very personal thing for him.
So I think you answered the question I was about to ask. Is the F8 the version of the Widelux you're basing the new prototype off of?
Yes, it's because we were searching for the latest camera with the least wear, because we really find several new old stock models, so that we can measure all the parts and just do the reverse engineering based on them.
It's interesting you should say that, because Rudi just jumped in here. Our friend Rudi Berden is just joined the podcast. Mm-hmm. And I think he's got a roll of film in an F8 right now, don't you, Rudi?
No, I don't. I just got it developed, or getting it developed right now.
Okay. Well, you just finished a roll in the F8.
Yeah, I hope it worked. It's the first time using the F7. I had an F6 before, which had some banding in it, which I gave to Mike. So he can experiment with it and see if he can get it fixed.
So the one you shot was actually an F7 rather than an F8?
Yeah, I thought it was an F8, but just looking at it now, it's an F7.
I never saw the top of it. But
yeah. It's not very clear. The F7 is very faded.
So what if someone was looking to buy a Widelux, like what are the major differences between, I'm not expecting to say every one. Are there certain models besides just newer is better? Or
at the end of the day, you can say definitely the newer is better, because it's spring driven. So you just have to see the spring itself, which is kind of the power source of the camera. The older the spring gets, less precise it's running. You have all the bearing parts are definitely getting dirty. You definitely need a CLA. So if you want to shoot slide film, for example, and where you need a very even movement of the barrel, I would recommend everyone to clean the camera or to do a CLA and just to have a specialist to look at it.
Whose glass are you going to use for lenses?
The good thing is that where we live, we have all these
two good ones.
Well, the company itself, the research and development is done in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. So maybe the camera enthusiasts among you know Bad Kreuznach is kind of like famous for optic industry. So there is the research and development is going to happen. The new address also of the company is there. And production will be in Wetzlar, where Leica is located. And we also have the service and maintenance that would be in Hamburg. But all of these things are already in planning.
And what name will it, Marwa, what name would it come under? Does it come under a Widlux?
You have to wait a little bit. I'm not authorized to talk about it at the moment.
So is the original company still in business that made them? No. Okay. No. So at least you don't have that. That's at least one obstacle out of the way. Well, I mean, anytime any new camera is being brought back is exciting for the industry as a whole. We know Pentax is trying to make something. There's a lot of them though are like kind of half, attempts made in China. And, I don't know of too many, real efforts to reignite a classic camera in Germany, made of metal with the original design in mind. Yes. I mean, what you guys are doing is pretty uncommon.
Yeah, well, but again, I mean, if you just do a small production run, then Germany is really a place for that. Because especially Chinese manufacturers, they are thinking in hundred thousands of million units, Yeah. And if you just come with something with a smaller batch number, then they're not so happy about that.
So while we're waiting on the new Widlux, Skip, you mentioned something about a guy in Toronto or in Canada who does service. Is there someone also for Widlux?
So I went hunting for the Noblex, and Bob Watkins is kind of the guy in the US, but he's moved around a few times. I did buy a new button from him, a new multi-exposure button.
Bob is Precision Camera Works in Lakeway, Texas, right?
Well, he was in California, then he was in Texas, and he's back in California, I think. But
oh, he is? Okay.
But I contacted a guy named Siggy Rogue. Well, he's at Noblex Canada in Vancouver. He told me he's done over 250 of these, and he had the drums machined out of Delrin plastic, which is a very, very high quality industrial black plastic. And he took the whole thing apart and cleans everything, does everything. It's not cheap. I think it was like $300-400.
But he's essentially improving the design, sort of taking away that waxy wheel that it should have had all along, right?
Yeah, he's the guy. He's very good. You ship him to Washington, and he comes across the border and picks them up.
Oh, to pick them up.
So you don't have to pay. So you don't have to pay international shipping. They come from Washington for the U.S.
Well, with a plastic drum, that's going to be lighter than the original drum was metal, right?
No, the original drum was black. Was a plastic. Was
plastic. Oh, okay, all right. But it was sticky, so that.
Well, it was like a lot of industrial plastics that they eventually outgas. And they, they get sticky. And so there's nothing to do about it. There's no solving it. You've got to replace it. And they re-engineered it. And, but I had nothing good things to say about the guy. It was really nice deal. This is during COVID. So he said the border was closed for like 4 months. He couldn't even take a camera, but well worth it. Widluxes. Bob Watkins is doing Widluxes. There's probably two or three other people in the U.S.
I don't know. I did earlier this year. I did a worldwide camera repair database, and when it came to Widluxes and Noblexes, Bob Watkins was the name that kept popping up.
Well, Bob did that, I think, in the past, but he's not taking them anymore.
I sent it to Oleg in Russia.
No, he's in Slovakia. He relocated.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We made a podcast with Oleg. He's a really nice guy, and he's just.
It was inexpensive. He sent back a little roll of a strip of like 4 frames with a car in the snow, to test the camera back. It was really, really very nice guy.
Yeah. For listeners, Skip's actually holding up a Horizon
202.
So how does that compare, like, to the Widlux or the Noblex? Is that
they aren't. The Noblex has the best lens of the bunch. It's much more refined. But I'm telling you, this is a really, really nice tool. It's rugged. It's got 6 shutter speeds, and it's got a bunch of aperture. It's got 2 slit widths. It's got like 2 ranges. It's noisy.
There was even a later model, the S3, sorry, U500. It's your model with a 500 of a second. The Perfect has only 2 shutter speeds.
Oh, really?
But this one is, in fact, it's more round shaped.
Yeah.
And I think that was the reaction from Horizon to the Noblex design in the 90s. Because your camera, the 202,
looks inspired by it for sure.
Yes, exactly. So they just tried here. You see just here. That's the slow speeds. So I just got that for €100 from Moscow.
Yeah, I'm telling you, these are great cameras. It's much more reliable than the wide look, much less.
Well, and even back then, and it still applies today, if you're looking for swing lens and value, the Soviet cameras are the way to go. You know, a lot of them don't work, but factor in a CLA with the incredibly low. You said $150, right? If you have to pay $150 for the camera and another $250 on a CLA to Oleg, you know, you're in $400, but you'll actually have a really nice tool, and you're not going to find a Noblex or, you know, suffice it to say, a CLA'd wide lux for that price. So if you're willing to spend, you know, between $300 to $500, in my opinion, your best bet is to get a CLA'd Soviet camera.
Yeah, I picked up a 1970 Horizont, the metal bodied one.
Yeah,
on
nice one.
eBay from Kupog, our buddy in Slovakia.
Yep, he's in Slovakia also.
And I think I shipped, I think it was $120, and I have shot the crap out of that camera. I love shooting it. It's fun. It does get some banding on the high speeds, but in all honesty, you know, like Marvin was saying, I mostly shoot it at the slower speeds and get fantastic results at most films that I run through it.
And what were they new? What were each of these cameras when they were new? Denny, do you remember?
The prices?
Yeah, I mean, when they were new, what did these things cost? I can't remember.
They were not cheap, by the way.
No.
Even the Soviet ones. I can tell you that in the 1970s, in Germany, the first Horizon, that metal one that popped up, was in the range of, at the time, around 1,000 German marks. Which was quite a lot of money. It was cheaper than the wide lux, but it was expensive. The 202 was at the beginning of the 90s in Germany around 1,200 German marks. And
how many marks to the dollar?
I think at the time it was 2 German marks were $1.
So $600.
Something $600 to $700, yes, and the wide lux was, I think, around 2,000 marks. It was just $1,000 approximately, and the Noblex was something like in the 90s, 2,000 German marks, and the 202 was 1,200 to 1,300 German marks. So it was not cheap.
Again, so the camera with a CLA now is so much cheaper. I mean, now they're a real bargain.
I remember seeing these new for $16.95.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That sounds right.
And the Noblexes were about the same price.
Yes, the Noblexes were in the same price range. Yeah,
and up. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It may be a little, well, not include the big ones. The big ones were more.
Yeah.
Well, and I sold the Fuji Panorama with all 3 lenses. You know, you were looking at $8,000 to $12,000.
Exactly. Or Lenhoff. You know,
the Technica was just
But those prices have shot up again recently.
Yeah.
They've shot up aggressively. That X, I've got a 617, not the X, and the X has gone exorbitant.
When I sold all mine after I left Fuji, I got them just before the film market collapsed, and I thought, oh my God, I need a fortune on these things. And then they just disappeared, and then I started showing up, and I look at the prices, and I think, wow, yeah, they're more than new now.
But the problem with the Hasselblad XPan is a little bit like they all have the same Achilles heel problem with their shutter, and it cannot be repaired. So
what?
Yeah, it's unfortunately one of the points.
Rudy?
Blame Fuji. Fuji built them all.
You know, I had one of those, and I had it for about 2 years. It was a great camera. I felt it was a little more of a one-trick pony. I kind of got tired of it after a while, even though the images were spectacular. I saw a lot of chromes. They were wonderful. Yeah. And I started getting squirrely, you know, because when you load the camera, the first thing it does is it sucks all of the film out of the cartridge and puts it on the take-up spool so it can know how much is left based on whether you've taken X number of regular 35s or X number of long pictures.
The real push behind that, though, was so that Fuji wanted the exposed film in the canister. They didn't give a crap about what format you took. It was about having the exposed film back in the canister so it was safe.
Well, it allows them to do the calculation too, because it knows how much film went out.
The exposure counter on the XPan will automatically adjust for however many standard ratio and wide ratio images you've done, which is nice.
When you flip the format, it changes the shutter number depending on every time you flip it, because it knows how much film is left.
But we're talking about the unreliable shutter on the XPan, and I couldn't have picked the timing better, but literally today, Rudi's got an XPan and we couldn't get it to work. We're like, try a different lens. Paul's like, try moving the aperture lever, try different batteries. And how, Rudi, explain what your experience was with that.
Well, I loaded the film. Everything went fine, and went out for a shoot, and nothing happened when I tried to shoot. But the only clue I got was that in the back of the screen, the numbers 8888 would show up, and that indicates somehow a shutter cocking mechanism that doesn't work anymore. Try to help it out like you advised with changing the lens or something like that, but nothing helped.
Has anybody looked in Japan? I mean, Fuji built those. Is there anybody in Japan fixing them? Because it was the TX, whatever it was. We never got to touch them because we weren't in Japan.
TX1 and TX2.
Yeah. Has anybody looked in Japan?
There's one repair station in France that did repair one in September of 2020. And whether they're still willing to do that, I don't know. The problem is the circuit boards are just not available.
That's the problem. I sold mine and I missed it. But, I said, c'est la vie, and I'm glad I never bought another one. They just scared the crap out of me that I would buy a $3,000 or $4,000 brick.
I know how you feel. It's my favorite camera, and it sits on my shelf as this glowing that one day is just going to die. It sits there, and every time I take it out, will this be the day that this camera, but it's still my all-time favorite camera based on, I love rangefinders, I love the formats. We can get into like you say, there's the discussion of widescreen versus panorama, and those lenses are stunning. So it's absolutely, but I know that it is a ticking time bomb on my shelf.
My solution is this, which is
what is that?
Which is a Mamiya Pro S 220 back, a Mercury camera 3D printed film gate adapter in it. And so it's a 220 backs, which means you get, long exposures. It's got he's made some changes inside, and you replace this thing here, and it's got little, there's a little film counter that I have a piece of tape, and you move the film counter down every time you use it. It's a little kludgy, and then when you get through, you have to crack it open in a dark room or bag and rewind it by hand. It's not that much different, especially if I got a 50 millimeter. I've only got a 65.
So I have the Bronica ETRS with a 35 mil wide back. I know there is a wide back in the States at the moment. There's another one floating around, but that's my back, like exactly. That's the backup there. And that allows you to rewind back into the canister. So it's a traditional mechanism. Got a Camerodactyl, Ethan Moses.
Camerodactyl, Homunculus 69. And I masked down the finder to right now. This is exactly the right shape. So I find these great because you can just pick it up and click. It's a nice point and shoot. It's a great camera. I use it all the time.
A topic that comes up frequently, and I'm glad Mark Faulkner's here on this episode, but, the world of 3D printing has opened up so many options for many industries. Photography, definitely is there too, from adapters. Anthony was talking earlier about using adapters for 120 on a 122 camera. We talked about that Italian company that's making, the Facmatic, and all those things. There's panoramic masks that are being printed, So Mark, have you gotten into any of that yet? Like tried to print any of your own homemade panoramic adapters?
Yeah, I messed around a little bit with it was a Mamiya 645. Just messed around a little bit with that to see if it would fit in there and stay in place. And most cameras, it seems like just with a little bit of foam, you can get something to kind of sit in there and won't shift around on you while you're trying to wind the film and take the shot. Something else that I've been looking at now is that apparently you can buy filament that is actually metal filament, and you print it at home, then you send it off to BASF and they will center it together and make a fully functional steel part out of it. And so that's something I'm going to try to mess with here and see if there's any, maybe to reproduce gears or something like that for some of the cameras that I tend to print in either PLA or nylon. And nylon even wears out over time if you have a very mechanical system like a set of gears or whatnot. So I'm kind of intrigued to try this steel printing and see how it works out.
I was wondering about a Hasselblad with a 645 or even an A12 back. Cut the dark slide. Could you do something like that? Put a mask in the viewfinder, and you're there.
Yeah, Bob, that's what this has in the back of this camera.
Does it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, when you glue it in, there's enough room on the outsides, and the maker, I forget what his name is, they got Mercury, cut a dark slide. It's got a little long, it's got film in it, so I don't want to take it out, but a little long, thin dark slide that slides in.
But I think with a blonde, I mean, we always put the dark slides in and out anyway. Just cut a dark slide, and you can be a panorama or not a panorama.
Yeah, well, I just, the 220s are so cheap, I bought another one, and I have another one that I use for sprockets, and that I just left unmodified, and I just run it through, and I have one for mask and one for sprockets.
The one that I turn to is the 617s, the art panoramas. It goes on a Graflock 4x5.
There you go.
That's easy, and it's got its own little ground glass.
Now, are there groups like are there Facebook groups or places where people discuss like all these homebrew options? Because I mean, you guys are throwing some stuff, and I can see them, and I don't even understand what you're showing. But I have to imagine that there's subgroups of film collectors that do this a lot. Like, can you recommend any resources?
There's a homemade camera podcast that
right.
That's out there.
It's a homemade Facebook page as well. Homemade camera Facebook page if you look up.
Well, Lomo has a couple options. There's an all plastic Lomo that does, I think, 6x17 or something like that, isn't there? And then they have the Sprocket Rocket, which is a 35 millimeter panoramic, but it exposes the sprockets.
Has anybody followed the guy GX Ace on YouTube? He's does amazing stuff. He's got really cool videos, and he's a kid that literally lives around the corner from me. And he makes takes the old light flash handles from Graflexes and makes them into lightsabers that have all the electronics in them, so they look real. But he is engineering stuff and he's a film fanatic. And I'm going to bring all this up with him and see if he owns most of these cameras anyway, and I'll see if he's interested and get him to contact you guys. He's a cool guy, and if anybody could come up with something, I think he could do it. He's got a full machine shop in his house now.
We were talking about the failures on the XPan, and while we were talking about it, I saw that Rudi pulled out a G617. And even though it may not have the angle of view of a wide lux, I have been really loving shooting that 617 because, for one thing, it has the complexity of a Voigtlander Vito B. It is like as manual of a camera as you could have. It has a really nice adjustable wind system that you can shoot 220 or 120 in it, and it sort of adjusts just by moving a pressure plate.
All 4 shots.
That's right. But what's nice about it is so dead simple. I mean, it is cock the shutter, set the focus, set the aperture, press the button, wind it. There's no electronics.
Remember to cock the shutter, though.
Yes. But this camera is not going to fail. I mean, this camera is not going to let you down in the field. I feel I've taken it out like on a skiff out in the middle of the Okefenokee swamp, where I'm like leaning over the bow of a boat cruising down these canals in the Okefenokee, totally confident that I'm going to get the shot that I'm after.
Well, it's funny you mention it, because years ago there's a big company I worked with, and they wanted to borrow my 617, and they were going to the North Pole. So I gave it to them. And when they came home, they said all the specially prepared Leicas, everything else died. Guys were dropping them. They said the only thing that worked was this G617. It was before the GX. And the biggest problem they had, when they had to advance so slowly because the film was so cold, it shattered like glass.
Yeah.
Ow.
And I was picking film out of that camera. I ended up having to send it in, and they had to rebuild it because there was just so much shards of film in there. But I still had the contact sheets of them that they shot, and it was the only camera that worked. And I didn't do anything to it. I just I didn't even think about it.
So if you want to get into the medium format, wide, exposure, that 617 is one hell of a camera. I'm really
You're right,
happy.
they'll never break. That's there's nothing moves.
Right.
But we do need to ask Paul, do you still miss that camera?
I miss that camera so much. I've actually got my eye on Rudi's.
That's probably why Bob liked Paul as his Fuji rep, because Paul would keep getting them and he kept selling them. Every time Paul gets one, he reminisces about how much he loves it, and then like 5 seconds later, he sells it to somebody.
My favorite kind of customer.
So Paul, what do you have that you're using in place of it?
I use a Sony A7 R2 with a Nikon 28mm PC lens.
Hard to argue with.
And the PC lens covers, a larger area.
Theo's got is that a 28 or a 35 PC?
No, I've got the 35 here in my hand.
I have both. They work interchangeably.
What's the image circle on the 35?
It's wide in the 28.
It's big. Yeah, it's big.
There are adapters you can put them on. You can put them on XPans.
Well, that's where I was going. I saw this guy.
And they even work on the site's round shots.
Correct.
Paul, can you explain how a perspective correction lens, like you have to shift it from left, center, right? Is that correct?
You make three separate exposures, and the way I do it is I shoot the first one centered, I shoot the second one shifted all the way to the left, and then I just rotate the whole lens so the shift is then on the right, and make the third exposure, and then you just simply merge them in Photoshop or Lightroom.
You can stick them on an XPan with an adapter, and they'll cover the frame.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
But the 28 cuts the corners.
28 vignettes.
It does, and
that has a bigger image circle. Yes.
It's not bad, but it's not good.
I'm really cheating now. I'm using my XT5 with a 1024 and just crop. But it's just way too easy, and I haven't even made a 160 meg file with it yet. So that's going to be one of my next things.
Yeah, that's the big deal with the Sony. You get a file in there that's it's a humongous file.
Yeah.
When you
I'm chewing on those 40 megapixel XT5 files. It was I didn't think about it when I first got it. It takes a while, and I've got a pretty good computer.
Rudy's looks like he's got a zone image.
He does.
Yeah, those are great. I've messed with those too.
Those are the pinhole ones, aren't they?
Got a pinhole. He's got a wooden pinhole. Look like a zone image wooden pinhole. Beautiful.
Patrick was holding up a Shinhao. Was that a Shinhao?
It's a copy. It's a KT617 art panorama.
Yeah, those are great. They're what it is a 6x17 back for a 4x5 camera.
Yeah,
that is what
it's 6x12 and 6x9. It's got masks in it too.
Yeah.
You need a 5x7 camera to hook it onto for
4x5.
4x5.
Fit on 4x5.
Yeah. I'm going to try it. I've got a KB Canon that I'm making a back for this so I can adapt it to it because I want to try it on a 5x7, hoping that I get a little bit less because sometimes you get vignetting depending on the lens.
Anthony, normally when we record these shows, it's his responsibility to write down all the names of the cameras that get brought up so we can include them. And this is going to be a rough one for you.
Well, since I'm going to be editing it, I'll just be noting them as I go.
Well, you guys know that for the GFX series, Fuji actually makes an adapter to fit on the back of a 4x5.
Yeah, I own it.
Do you? Have you used it?
Not yet. My GFX 100 system just showed up. So,
I got it. Yeah, that one's been driving me. I think, most people aren't even going to know. Younger people, they're not even going to know what to do with a view camera.
Bob, I still have a GX680 that I want to try to adapt it to as well.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Ones are really good lenses.
Oh, they were. Just don't bother with the 500. It was a great lens, but it was so unwieldy, and it had to have a little landing strip to roll on.
I own it.
You do.
I own it.
Oh, yeah. That's so awesome. Yeah, that was a great camera.
I've got an adapter that I just got. I can't remember who makes it now. It's a common one that I can put my Canon on the back of my 4x5 and it slides. So it'll do a little, it's not quite panoramic, but it's kind of the same.
That's pretty close.
PhotoDiox made that adapter.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They make some cool stuff.
You get some really large images out of that. I mean, the quality is amazing. I use it for landscapes.
Well, that 100S with that on a view camera, that is going to be very cool.
Absolutely. I just need time off. I just been working like a dog and
be retired like me. then you have even less time.
Well, real quick, I just want to say this. I realize the time zone doesn't always work for you, Marwan, but I mean, feel free to come back on other shows. I mean,
I would love to. I'd love to. It's really cool.
We like to have people on the show, even if that's their specialty, but you're always welcome to come back because we geek out about. We want updates. Yeah. I mean, who knows when something's going to come back. And this is the whole concept of the show is we don't script anything. We have a vague idea of what a show is going to be about. And I had no idea most of the people were going to be here, and we get notoriously off topic, but everything's on topic here.
That has to be like that.
Andrew, did you have any questions for Marwan?
Yeah, so I was wondering, do you have any sort of like time frame on when the sort of wide lux revival might be available?
Yes. I mean, at the moment, what we are doing is as I said, we are in the middle of the prototyping phase. That means it is followed by a stress test. We think in November we are about to do that. The stress test means that the prototype has to undergo 100,000 or 150,000 releases, shutter releases. So, and then we'll find out where are the weak points of our construction, and we try to fix that. And then immediately from that point, we will start a pre-sales announcement. It is not really a typical Kickstarter project because the entire research and design and prototyping is done by is financed before. So it's not that typical project where you say, okay, we want to make a camera. We have never made one. Give us money and we'll do it. And maybe it's working or not. So the moment we have a reliable 100% working camera that we can give warranty on, then we're going to announce that. And I think in around November, we know the precise or more precise schedule. But at the moment on silvergrandclassics.com, we have a special section before widelux.com goes online. That is going to happen also during this year. But at the moment, you can find updates and you can find information about that project all the time. We also started a gallery. So we also we would love to invite photographers who are photographing with swing lens cameras to show their work.
So with that being said, is it going to be sort of a pre-order only where there's a limited window and you're only going to make a limited number, or is it going to be sort of ongoing production?
It will be an ongoing production. So as long as people want that camera, we'll make it. And we have to see. I mean, it's a niche market in that niche of analog photography. But I mean, we were involved in that Leica M6 release. And so far as I know, you have to wait at least 1 year until you get your model. Although Leica increased their production around factor 10. So, and they cannot hold up with that. So we think that this camera, people will like it. But as I said, after the summer, just have a look into it. What we wanted to do with that announcement this time was to show the community something's happening. We are working on that. And we were 2.5 years working on that project, and we had to keep silence because of trademark issues and all that stuff, and we didn't want to promise too much because we want to make a feasibility study that it works, and we know it will work. That's the reason why we went out with
that's what will drive the sales. Reliability will do that.
Yeah. So Marwan, with that, I mean, one of the things that struck me with this project is it's not the usual 3D printed box where people put their own lenses on and there's not anything really moving or doing or anything like that. This is a much more complicated camera. I mean, it's got a swing mechanism. It's got all sorts of things like that. Have you thought about in terms of, and I'm sure you have, but have you thought about in terms of how the cameras would be serviced?
Yes.
Are they going to be,
yes.
I mean, you mentioned warranty, but obviously they'll need service across the world. Is there a manufacturer behind it that's going to be able to do that?
Yes. We have that already. As I said, we founded, we are the manufacturer in Bad Kreuznach directly. We founded a company to do that. And there will be a service and maintenance place And our plan is also to train in different parts of the world specialists who can do that, let's say on the US or the American continent, in Asia, Australia, and Europe. So there are definitely plans for that.
Oh, brilliant. Because
yeah. That's, by the way, also Jeff. By the way, I have to say a little bit. One of the points Jeff wanted that we do not use any plastic or plastic if necessary. Yes, but if technically necessary, but the little as possible. And his idea behind that was that he wants to have a camera that stands generations, so that you can hand it over to your son or daughter or whatever, you know. It's kind of like we want to have something sustainable, and it should really last. And that's the idea behind that also.
That's what'll sell it then too.
And that's one of the points. I mean, Jeff, he's well known, and he's definitely someone who thinks about environment and how we have to save our resources and stuff like that. So that's part of the idea of this construction.
Well, it's good to hear that it seems like you have a lot of bases covered, because I've seen a lot of other projects kind of pop up on Kickstarter and like not go anywhere, and even stuff like that new Pentax camera. It seems like they're really kind of winging it, and I'm kind of disappointed that they haven't really released any details or anything. So
there's one thing about that wide lux which made us very happy about it, is that we don't have a classic shutter. The shutter is for nearly all camera projects so far. If there was that reflex camera, and they all failed about the shutter. Because at the end of the day, if you just want to have a production, the shutter should not cost more than 5 to 10 euros.
We were talking about this just in a private chat. You know, I said that's one of the things this has going for it, is the lack of a traditional shutter. I mean, anybody could make a twin blade 1/200th of a second simple plastic shutter. Yes. But when people talk about a new Pentax or Nikon resuming production of the F6, let's just say, to produce a modern shutter with modern assembly lines and costs and parts and distribution has got to be astronomically high. And if someone wanted to reintroduce the XPan, they'd have that same problem. But the wide lux with the swing lens, you know, I don't want to oversimplify it, but the lack of all those parts has really working in your favor. And I can't imagine, I'm not good at keeping secrets. I can't imagine having to keep this under wraps for 2.5 years, but I think
it was really hard. Yeah.
Well, it was a smart decision, because I tell you what, if you would have announced this in 2020, like, we're going to bring back the wide lux, a year later, you're going to be the bane of existence. Everybody's going to think it's vaporware, when in reality, that's just how long this stuff takes. And you're to the point where you're actually printing prototype pieces. You're months away from having something to show and do some stress testing and such like that too. So I commend you for having the ability to keep your mouth quiet about it for as long as you did.
Yeah, the thing is, we don't want to promise things we cannot hold, and that was one of the reasons a lot of people said, "Oh, we need more shutter speeds, we need focus and all that stuff. We need another winding mechanism." We don't want to do that in the first step, because the worst thing is to introduce failure possibilities, and then you just get the warranty situation of tomorrow, and then people are losing trust in it. So the idea is to keep it as close to the original. Yeah, we're just going to see what's going to happen.
Marwin, does in the original wide lux, or in your version, is it just the speed of the drum that changes the exposure?
It will be the same thing. You know that with the Horizon, for example, you just have two speeds. You have the slow, and you are just changing the slit size.
Right.
Yeah. Our system will have the same escapement like the original wide lux. So we have 3 speeds. So it's a 150th, a 125th, and a 250 of a second speed, like the F8. There is nothing is going to change. What we try to improve is this. Don't change the shutter speed before you mount the camera. We're going to work on that, so that it is the operational safety is higher. And coming back to the story of is it feasible, or the feasibility study what we made, if you see the wide lux, the F8 has approximately 100 parts.
That's it.
That's it. I mean, I'm not counting washers and screws and all that stuff, but for big parts, we're talking about 100 parts on average. And we're talking if we take a Leica R4 or R5, we're talking about 1,000 parts, and
let's take a Contorex.
Well, Contorex, yeah, exactly.
Please.
Well, 1,200, I think, or 1,500 parts, and so that was one of the things where we just, after we counted the parts, we said this is doable. It is doable, and the only thing is we have to see it's more a clockwork mechanism than a camera, and that makes this camera really an interesting, also from the engineering point of view, and because it was made in this small amount of numbers back then, we can adapt that easily to modern production methods that are designed for smaller production numbers. So
still spring wound?
Yeah. The same thing. We don't put any electricity in it. There's no motor in that. Highlight Electronics, the split grade controller company. Well, we talked with one company in Wetzlar. They did and for some kind of ideas to share, and they told us they would like to make it electric. And immediately Jeff said, "No, I don't want it. I want to have a mechanical camera," and I think that's what people also want. Nobody wants an electric-driven camera where you put rechargeable batteries in there, and that's why we decided on a mechanical system.
But there's your tagline too. Your tagline is "It's like clockwork."
Yes, yes, and we definitely need watchmaker skills because even if you have the design, and that's what I also learned when we talked to all these camera manufacturers, they said, even if you have that design done on your drawing board, you have to have a watchmaker who has to take a look on it to say, look, this wheel will not turn as it should. So you have to grind here an edge there and stuff like that so that it works. So this is the fine tuning they have to do, and that needs skills. The good thing is that we have these skills here around in the circle of 20 or 30 kilometers around Wetzlar. So that's not a big deal.
You can just drive down to Glashütte and talk to the watch guys down there. I'm sure they'll help you.
Yes.
I want to kind of start winding down. I don't want to occupy too much of your guys' time, but one thing we like to do on most episodes is a lightning round where we'll go through, I'll ask a question and you guys give an answer. So this is fantasy world here, okay? Mm-hmm. If there's one camera that's ever been made from, a daguerreotype to whatever, everything's on the table. But if you could pick one camera that you wanted to see brought back, whether it's Silver Grain Classics or whoever, what would be your one camera that you'd like to see brought back besides the wide lux, of course? Marwan, I'll start with you. What's a camera you would love to see brought back by somebody?
Well, the Minolta XM motor.
XM motor, okay.
Oh,
Dean.
Yeah.
Dean, what about you?
I would honestly say if they could, it would be an XPan, but a mechanical XPan.
XPan.
A mechanical one.
Mechanical X. So a fantasy XPan, but I like where you're going with this
total fantasy XPan.
All right, Paul.
I'd have to go with the Machina 667.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, folder.
Ray.
Blobble 6.7. Yeah, same as Paul.
Another one. Richard.
Yeah, jump in again with Machina. I think that's 6.7. Sure.
Patrick.
The GW690.
GW690. Ooh, Fuji. Okay, another good one. Mark Faulkner.
A Miranda that works.
That works. Any Miranda. There you go. The older the Miranda, the more of a chance you have of it working, but that's still not even a guarantee. Theo, you cannot say the Mamiya 7.
Mamiya 7 too.
Mamiya 8.
The Mamiya 8. There you go. Oh, they've thrown me now. That's not fair.
What? You're like the 10th person we asked.
Yeah, but I was going to want a new Mamiya 7. That's actually still being built.
You took away that golden ticket he has.
But yeah, I actually wouldn't mind a Machina in that case too.
Okay. Rudy?
Well, since I come out from the XPan experience and never had a chance to shoot with it, I would agree with having a reliable XPan. That would be nice, even if I could shoot it once.
Bob?
Guess I wish I had my GX617 with all the lenses back. That was fun.
Okay. Andrew?
I think I'd go with a Nikon FM3A. I know that one's a little newer.
There you go. It's a great camera. I mean, it doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
Pentax LX was a hell of a system too. Remember that?
Yeah, those are great. I love that, the LX. Anthony.
I am going to go with the Panon 120 swing lens panoramic camera, which I'm hoping that Marwan is also taking apart and measuring. And
Maybe we could call it then the King Kong with Jeff Bridges.
I was going to ask if these are going to be called bridge cameras.
Bridge cameras. And then for me, I'm glad Anthony didn't pick it, but I'm going to go Kodak with the Medalist. I'd love to see a new Medalist. I love that thing.
Hey, I just picked up a box, not the camera, but the box for a Bantam special at an estate sale.
Wow.
The box is even gorgeous.
So Mike, probably, I mean, I like square. So I think that the Mamiya 6, not the old 6, the one predecessor to the 7, given that it's square.
The MF, the one with the multi-format one.
I almost said the Super Iconta 6x6.
Oh, nice camera.
I do have one more camera I want to talk about today, because we're talking about panoramics, and one thing that no one's talked about is the actual panorama wide pick.
Oh,
which is
Focus free.
Focus free. It's fantastic. It's dedicated panorama, and Marwan, I'm happy to swap one for one of the new wide luxes if when it comes out, because it really this is a dedicated panorama.
Optical lens, I believe, too, isn't it?
Optical lens, Theo?
Optical lens.
Yes, focus free optical lens. It's got like a lens cover and everything.
Can't make a better deal. Can't make a better deal.
In all seriousness, though, Minolta, I briefly mentioned earlier, Minolta had that Vista view. Paul, what's it actually called?
We call it the Vista. In Australia and in Europe, it's called something else.
Isn't it the P? The P. In Indonesia, it's the P, and China, and Japan, it's the P.
What's different about that camera? So they made a ton, especially in the 90s. For some reason, I don't know why. In the 90s, everybody, even Nikon was doing this in some of their SLRs, where they'd make a mask that would just drop down in the film gate, and it would chop off. Right? Yeah, instead of a 24 by 36, you'd get 18 by 36.
Yep.
But those were all full frame cameras. It just
Mark's got the Visco wide. That's what I was going to ask. That's the coolest thing ever.
The Visco wide, the 16 millimeter swing lens.
Yeah.
I remember dealing with the mini lab owners who had to buy all those adapters to print the panoramas that people got. And then they gave them great big prints, and the people did not understand what they were getting. And man, was it expensive.
You shoot a 36 exposure roll panoramas and you got a $40 bill.
That's right. Remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
God, people would hit the roof.
Really, Paul, is that true? They charge more for them?
Sure. Yeah.
We were doing big prints.
Bigger prints. You had a 6 by 10?
Yeah.
No, 4 by 10.
4 by 10.
4 by 10 is what?
Yeah.
Wait, and that's from a 16 millimeter camera?
No, that was from 35 millimeter.
35, and remember, some of those APS cameras had that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
4 by 6, 4 by 7, 4 by 10.
Yeah, people were very surprised.
We haven't spoken about is that a lot of labs will charge you extra to do your scans for XPan, for wide lux. If you're not doing it at home, luckily these days, if you are using home kits, Lightroom and Photoshop, the merging system that they have developed with AI now is so phenomenal. I put together those 617 images in 3 batches, and you can get incredible. The merge is incredible. It's seamless. But a lot of labs, I think, as the proliferation of some of the wider formats are coming back, some of the labs are willing to do the scans without extra cost, but a lot. That's another extra additional problem with panoramics is it's an extra cost in lab form and getting your scans done, and some of the masks, some of the companies these days don't have those masks anymore.
A good tip that I found if you develop yourself and you scan at home with a flatbed scanner, instead of buying expensive adapters and masks and stuff, a cheap hack is to go to like Target or a store and get like a 5x7 or an 8x10, just a plain Jane glass photo frame, and take out the glass and sandwich your negative between the 2 pieces of glass, and then put it on your flatbed. I take electrical tape and just wrap it around the edges of the glass so that I don't scratch the surface of my scanner.
Don't you get Newton rings?
No, people have asked me that before. I don't, and I don't understand why. I don't.
You're probably using non-reflective. You probably have that anti-reflective glass. That'll reduce that.
This is how I do it. I have 3 pieces of plate glass taped together on the edges with tape.
Exactly. That's what I do too.
I put it right on the platen, and because it creates a tiny little gap There's enough that I don't get any Newton rings.
Nope.
I can do XPans 6x12s. I can do everything.
I do 127 film. I can do 110. Even when I get some really expired 35 millimeter that curls so badly that it won't sit in the holder, I can just put it in there and then it flattens it. You stick it right on the scanner. And because it's resting on another piece of glass, it's raised because the actual focal point on a flatbed scanner is slightly above the surface. That's why you can't just lay film on the glass.
What's funny? I've got an Epson V800 and I just tape them to the glass, and for whatever reason, it's able to change the focus.
It does?
Point. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm a Neanderthal. I just tape it down with Scotch tape.
Yeah, Patrick, okay. I put mine right on the plat.
I've told that to many people, and the question is always, well, don't you get Newton rings? And I don't. And it works. I think it's one of those things that's so simple, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, that people overthink it and they don't realize that if you have a flatbed scanner, just put it on the scanner and don't use a frame at all. Don't get me wrong, it's a very slow process. You're going to be doing a lot of cropping and rotating and stuff depending on what scanning program you use, but it's a good option.
There's one thing I would suggest that you have to do is load Ektachrome in your panoramic camera and project it really with a 6x6 projector. Put it in a frame, make some kind of tape on it, mask it. You cannot believe what kind of images you get. Ektachrome is such a wonderful material, and especially
Don't tell me that.
It's really amazing.
Anybody shooting E6, if you're not having AGX imaging up in Sault Ste. Marie process it for you, you're missing the boat. That guy does the best, most exact to the Kodak Z manual E6 processing known to the world. It's called AGX, so it's like silver. AGX Imaging. The guy's name is Mike Lucier. He used to run A&I E6 labs out in California. And his father-in-law wanted him to move back home with his daughter and kids, and he wanted to get out of LA. So he's got the biggest Refrema dip and dunk. His motto from the start was the best and the last. And I said, what's that mean? He goes, I'm going to do the best E6 even when I'm the last person doing E6.
Very cool.
And he does scans, and he does really good scans. So look him up and just tell him I recommend you, because he's just a great guy, and you will not get bad film back from this guy.
I'm going to do that. I've done my own and had good results. I mean, I've got 5x7 E6, and I do my own because I've got a Jobo with the drum, and it turns out pretty good. But every once in a while,
the Japanese hated the Jobos. They said this film was never designed for constant agitation, and so they wouldn't even work with those guys, because Jobo was in Ann Arbor, and it took me 6 years to get them to work with Jobo to get standards. Fuji did all the R&D and Kodak chemistry, so that when it got here, there wasn't going to be a problem, because we didn't want to make chemistry. So Mike is just an amazing guy, and he's doing great work. Check him out anyway. He's not cheap, but you won't get bad film.
Quality isn't cheap. And tell him Bob sent you. But I want to thank everybody for coming on the show. Marwan, it is awesome to have you on.
It was really a pleasure, and it was cool.
I loved hearing about the project.
Everybody go subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Yeah, we're going to have the discount code posted. This show, it's going to take at least a week to get edited before it's out there, but we'll get it shared to the Facebook group if we want to get some more people to take advantage of that. I think I speak for everybody either here and future listeners that we're excited to hear updates about the project and see how it comes along. Once it does come along, whatever you guys have planned next, I'm sure it's going to be something awesome. Feel free to come back on any future show we record, usually every other week. The concept is exactly the same. Thank you for everybody else. Rudi, it's awesome to finally get you on the show. Bob, Paul's talked about you a number of times, so it's great to have you back. Ray, Richard, Skip, Mark, it's always great to have you. Andrew, for our next show, it's going to be in 2 weeks. The topic is loosely going to be unobtainium cameras, which we inadvertently was this episode. I think almost everything has been unobtainium.
I have a few.
So maybe it'll be unobtainium chapter 2, other things of any kind of formats. But as always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are decided entirely by you, as we've witnessed many, many times. Just because we say we're going to talk about something doesn't mean we end up doing that. That's the show's biggest strength and its biggest weaknesses, but I'll take it. So thanks, everybody. You guys all have a great night, and I look forward to talking to you all again.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. welcome to episode 52 of the. Wait, it is 52, right? That is okay.
But believe me, it's excellent. I love that what you're talking here about. That's kind of like drugs. It keeps me awake.